Hi, and welcome to Soul and Science, a podcast on uniting Western psychology with Eastern wisdom. My name is Nyana, and I'm a psychotherapist residing in India and in conversation with Ardaas ji, who is an international trainer in yogic wisdom, and he is from Portugal. We invite you to embark on a profound exploration of the human journey with us. We integrate scientific insights into the mind with Eastern wisdom on life's polarities, paradoxes, and boundless nature to uncover a deeper understanding of our existence. Season 1, we begin with the exploration of relationships and the part that leads back to the self. Why relationships? We are constantly engaging in relationships with everything around us, from people to our environment. While we usually focus on relationships between two people, the most profound relationship we have is with ourselves. How many of us are truly aware of this relationship we have? Do we nurture it, trust, love, and respect it? Or are we living in fear and rejection of self, waiting to be validated externally? So join us as we go deep dive into the relationship with our mind, our body, and our spirit. Hi, hello, and welcome everybody to our episode of Soul and Science. Today, we're going to be talking to you about our relationship with the mind, body, and spirit. It's about our relationship with being whole. And I welcome with us, as always, our yogi, Ardaas ji, who takes us and helps us through all the knowledge of ancient wisdom. So, Ardaas ji, today we're going to be talking about a concept of mind, body, spirit, and wholeness. And like we always begin with some kind of origin of the word, definition of the word. I'm going to begin with sharing that, and I don't know if you've looked at something yourself, which I'm sure you have, to share and meet me to make this a whole and complete definition. So wholeness that I found was the state of forming a complete and whole experience, like unity, something that's unbroken and undamaged. And it comes from the Old English word hal, which means unhurt, safe, or genuine. Um, and it's really funny because when I read this definition, all what I wanted to talk about sort of changed. What I wanted to
Okay.
bring to the conversation kind of evolved almost instantly. But I'm going to kind of leave it there and see what comes up for you when you looked at wholeness or mind, body, spirit.
Well, let me just say hello, everyone, and thank you for being here, and thank you, Satsema, also for organizing this podcast. And okay, so genuine, yeah, something genuine, something that is genuine implies original as well somehow,
Yeah.
and body, mind, spirit, holistic. Okay, I'm very interested to start today from your side. I know that the concept of body, mind, spirit, and the union of the three is something that we associate with yoga already. Yeah, it's something that most people, when they think about yoga, they think about this body, mind, spirit. So before we approach it from that side, I would like to know, how do you approach it from the psychologist side? And why reading that definition made you, what changed when you read that definition? What was the change? I'm very curious about this now.
Okay. So I'm going to go through the trajectory of psychology a little bit. And so I think originally psychology we know was the study of the soul, but very quickly when you start measuring things, there are some things you can't measure. And so we kind of put spirit on the side, because how do you measure that? Right? You can measure the mind,
Right.
you can even measure today the fMRIs, the EEGs, the brain waves. You could see what lights up and things like that. So science, essentially, as long as you can measure it, science is with you. If I can't measure it, then probably is there or isn't there, I don't know. And we leave that out. So I think if we go back to psychology, before, what we could measure over time has stayed, and that's the mind. And psychology became about the mind. And so we can talk a lot about the mind, the brain, and how we have two sides of the brain. One is emotional, one is rational. They speak to each other, and healthy mind, unhealthy mind. And that's where the whole conversation around mental illness even began, right? Um, what we didn't look at in psychology is the role of how emotions and the body comes into play. And so we were
Mm-hmm.
only working with the mind, and then that became pretty defined in a lot of ways. And then fast forward a few years, and people like Peter Levine and all started talking more about somatic work with the body. So, how the mind and body are connected, they speak to each other. We understand the central nervous system. We know that we have an autonomic nervous system,
Mm-hmm.
and that the body actually first responds, then it sends the message to the brain saying it's in danger, and then the brain sends back a message, and that's how things work. And that's when they started realizing that the emotions is not felt in the brain, they're felt in the body. And the trauma is not, or memories are not only in the brain, but your body also stores them. We don't only have a brain in the head, we also have a brain in the gut. And they started talking about this other brain, also called the intuition, but we started calling it another brain. And so they said, okay, fine. And therefore, if the gut is not working okay, most of our serotonin, dopamine that are required for this brain to work and people to be happy and to be healthy is created in the gut. So the body also comes into play. And the realization that, therefore, then when we're looking at working with clients or patients that come with uh, um, quote unquote mental illness, we're looking at mind and body. And then around the same time, it's just a few years ago, it's probably in the last few decades, that people started recognizing that there is a natural progression when you have either mental illness, depression, or trauma, that the body or the mind perceives itself as fragmented and broken. And
What, sorry, can I just ask, why did you put mental illness between brackets? Is that because we are not sure really it's only about the mind, or because some things are called mental illness while they are not necessarily? Or
yeah, because it has a wide definition today. So I'm not going to link it only to um, today. What we consider trauma and things are not necessarily a part of the DSM, the manual for that looks at coding mental illness. Do you have depression? Do you have, this thing? Trauma is not still a part of that manual. So I'm just going to, that's why I said mental illness, quote unquote, because trauma
okay,
is a big part of the reason. Or today, other people don't say that there is mental illness. They said everything is PTSD. So different people are talking about it differently today.
I see, I
Therefore,
see.
I'm just going to put them in inverted commas for now, to acknowledge that there are different schools of thought around this today.
Right.
And so the work of compassionate inquiry and all, IFS started talking about, hey, when you have trauma, yes, the mind feels fragmented, it creates wounds, you have a distorted sense of the fact that I'm bad, or beliefs that are fragmented, and there are parts in the body, but there is a part that's untouched, that's always been whole, and that's your essence. And that when
Right.
you're in touch with that and you're able to observe from that space of compassion and wholeness, you're able to hold all of this information that the mind is constantly firing to create a sense of awareness and consciousness around the fact that I'm actually whole, and I'm probably the sum of all my past, and I can integrate that together. Because
So,
there
so
is,
can I ask, from the psychological perspective, uh, this wholeness, this aspect of wholeness, does it come as a result of healing that part which is linked to the trauma, or by including this aspect which is the essence that is in all of us and is hidden, already the trauma starts to heal, or happens both ways at the same time, or how do you approach it?
pretty much happens both ways at the same time. So when you get in touch with your true self or that essence, then you're able to, over sessions, become stronger to observe that part of you that believes it's broken, and to recognize it's a perception, it's a belief, it's not the truth. But that part may have had some past wound, or something may have happened that made it take on a belief that I'm broken. And that if, in the presence of my own wholeness, because I know I'm able to hold it, my observation, my consciousness, with compassion, this part may will begin to heal and integrate back into the wholeness, into the original belief that I am whole. So they kind of carry each other through. So the work is far less of the therapist, and now the individual's own essence is holding, and we create a safety container for that. And we say that this work happens in the presence of safety and connection. And
Right.
the reason why my whole talk today changed is when I saw the definition of safe, unhurt, and genuine. And when I think of genuine and I think of safe, I think of authenticity. And
Mhm.
a lot of all of the work that we do is to let those masks go, to come back home to our authenticity. All the masks that we put on around, showing up in the world, because somewhere there may be some wound or insecurity that I took on in the absence of safety, right? I do that because somewhere
Right.
I feel that I'm not safe in who I am to show up like that,
Right.
to be genuine. And therefore, I have had to put on this mask and armor. And I was like, oh my God, yeah, that's everything that whether it's Kundalini yoga or whether it's been compassion inquiry, it's been talking about how you are letting go of those in the presence of the safety of a therapist or a teacher. You are beginning to let go of those parts that are not you, to come home to your own inner authenticity and genuine wholeness. And that completely made the entire understanding of wholeness and this conversation be very different for me.
Okay.
Because I was centering it around um, how these beliefs arrive in the absence of safety and the absence of connection, and that it's actually unhurt. And when we think of trauma is a wound, and it talks about being hurt, right? That authenticity has hidden away, and there was a part that was wounded and felt I need to protect, right? And
Right.
that's how we're showing up in the world today, right? And with these wounds and these pains that we have, and we are distracting, but the biggest pain is that we are actually disconnected from our genuine authenticity, our wholeness.
Yeah, it's kind of a paradox because to reach our authentic self, we have to get out of our comfort zone and therefore feel unsafe, because the
Mm-hmm.
comfort zone by definition is the place where we feel safe, and that's not our real self. So in order to get to that essence, we're going to have to go through an unsafe passage. Maybe that's why going by the hand of someone is easier, no, having a teacher, having a professional that can guide you in the dark moments when you're crossing through unsafe passages of the mind or the emotions or even the body. That's going to be necessary to have somebody who's helping you along, no? That because I feel unsafe, is this okay? The way I'm going, is this fine? And but eventually, when you reach that true, genuine, authentic self, like you were describing it, that's the maximum place of safety, because what can damage you there?
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing, first of all, there's nothing foreign to you because you are in union with everything. And secondly, it's just um yeah, I cannot imagine anything that could pose some danger. I mean, you could lose your life. Yeah, sure. But you have something much more valuable than this life. You have some essence that carries on. So the concept of safety that is very often guided by the most basic instincts of survival it takes a relative position, because now we have something much more valuable than the survival of the body. We have something that is going to endure, is going to continue after this lifetime. So when you find that place, it's not that you have to go and, find risks in the world just, for the sake of it, but somehow the feeling of risk changes. The perception of what could be risky changes, because you have something very safe, something that is going to continue.
Yeah. And what I found interesting was so many concepts, so many thoughts came up for me, is that when I sit in the room and I'm working with a client, the fears that people have is I'm going to be judged. I'm not okay the way I am.
Right.
Good enough. Oh, I didn't do well. The world is about achievement. And so if I haven't got that achievement, I'm not worthy. I'm not valuable, right? And we're looking externally for that. And to what extent are we therefore then um, going further away from our essence? Because somewhere in the beginning we probably didn't get seen for our essence, or it wasn't reflected back in to us, or we were told that it's not okay to sit like this, it's not okay to talk too loud, it's not okay to joke, it's not okay to be this person. And somewhere I got the message that it's not safe to be me, and we're trying to be this other person, and we're trying to be this perfect person, and we're trying to show up as perfect all the time. And then the inner battle begins, and then I don't know how to sit with this battle. And then the mind becomes really loud, because there are all these conflicting thoughts and voices in my head. You're not okay the way you are, your inner critic is there, there's this and there's that. But I don't have that anchor within me that's saying I'm whole enough, so I'm going around in circles. And if I don't have that anchor, then I'm just going literally, what do I need to do to be enough? And nobody's ever said, but you're whole already and that you're enough, and that rests within you. There is an essence, right? Because that messaging is not given to you from earlier on, and that anchoring then, what my sense of self comes in relationship to someone else. And that's the reason why this podcast began with relationship in itself, is that what
Mhm.
is your relationship with your essence and yourself, and have you met yourself, and do you like yourself? And last time we talked about self love. But most of us see all the things we were told we are not good at, and say, okay, I'm not worthy and I'm not enough. But that reflection of your inherent worthiness, value, and wholeness wasn't present, and that became unsafe. So I never saw it in me. And today the work and the journey is, let's see you observe that and be with that, and then what is the possibility from there?
Okay. I think you've identified very well one kind of problem very clearly. Yeah, when somebody is not encouraged to find that, how can we put it, internal capacity to self-assess, to sense from the inside whether what you're doing is okay or not depending constantly from the outside. And if the outside is not giving you that validation that you are okay, then you're going to feel bad about yourself. That's a very clear problem, and you've identified it very well. I would like to explore also the other possibility,
Mhm.
another possibility. So that one is very clear, very clear. If you as a child, you receive this information that, everything that you are doing wrong, everything that you should change, everything that you have to do to conform to the family or society or whatever, what the adults want you to be. And then you are, limiting your expression. So you are becoming smaller and smaller. That's a very, very clear problem. And I've started to see the opposite though.
Mm.
And I would like to explore that. I don't know where it's going to take us, because I've never really went too far with this thought, but I observe many parents who are now going all the other way, to the other extreme, where everything the child does is perfect, everything is great, everything is good, everything is wonderful. There's no correction, there's no judgment, no no, this could be better, no, nothing like that. Everything is perfect as it is, which is which is funny because in a way that is one of the conclusions of the spiritual path. As you advance, you realize that everything is perfect. But at the same time, when you trying to bring it to children, there's some sort of, I don't know if this is toxic positivity. It might have to do with toxic positivity, but I see children which are also having a different kind of experience to what you were describing. You were describing something of, maybe traumatic or the origin of trauma and not expressing ourselves and hiding ourselves under many layers. I'm not sure what the consequences are of the other one, the one I'm suggesting now, but I feel there's something toxic in that as well. Have you had an experience like that? Have you observed that parents who are totally so absolutely everything is perfect about the children that the children get to be a little bit wild, a little bit self-centric, not self-centric, egocentric, and narcissists, and everybody has to cater to what I'm doing. Have you said not? I see from your face this is probably not your experience.
No, I think because of the role that I play and the area of work that I do, I don't really, I'm sure there might be parenting coaches who may see those things, but I don't necessarily see that in in that sense. I usually see that even with I mean, there might be there are parts again of um young children that you see, and the ones that I have seen, even with this kind of behaviors, usually a protective mechanism, at least in the work that I've seen. Um, and so I don't know if I can share much about that trajectory of what that might look like. But either of these two, I think the fact that the essence of wholeness still is, um, and the in the core of finding that alignment to the essence would mean moving away from just the egoic mind, uh, and to integrate the body and the spirit into, or the soul, or what we call the intuition, to guide that journey for any of us.
Yes, I agree with that, but I think that's a matter that, I mean, maybe it's because I was thinking about childhood
Mm,
right now. So I was putting myself in the role of a father and trying to imagine how is parenting when you try to avoid the typical pitfalls that you were describing, no, not giving children their own self-value.
mm,
Um, as an adult, I think that's the path, yeah,
mm,
to go towards the self and dealing with the ego and finding the authentic self and so on. However, and one thing that we say in yoga is that the ego is also necessary.
mm,
So you have to get away from the spirit to come back to the spirit. We
mm,
cannot just from the beginning, because this could be a temptation. Yeah, you are a yogic girl that suddenly has children, and then you decide, well, how can I raise my children so that they never have an ego and they never have to suffer what I suffered to deal with it? And I'm not sure that's the right approach because the child needs to create his or her own bubble, independent bubble, and feel separate from others and feel that they are different. There's all these things which yoga tells us, we are all one, we are all connected, we are all at a certain level, we are all connected. But the child cannot be. It's hard to put this into words. I'm realizing it's very difficult to explain because on one side, when you are very, very little, up to 3.5 years old, that experience of being connected is already there.
mm,
So as babies come into the world, they are already connected. And in order for them to develop their own capacity to, experience the world and express themselves in the world, they need to isolate themselves.
mm,
There's this concept in yoga that is fundamental to yoga. I mean, the word yoga means union. So this today's podcast is about wholeness, right? Which is like a union of all your different parts. And in the title, we already said body, mind, spirit. There is other levels that we could talk about which parts are being united. But it's interesting from the perspective of yoga because all the problems start also with another union, a different union. And it's what we call the union between the seer and the seen.
Mm.
The seer would be the soul, the self, the most inner essence, genuine essence, authentic essence that you were describing before. And the seen is the material world around us. Now that's the beginning, and that's caused by ignorance. Ignorance makes us believe that this world is as it is, and there is nothing else but what we see and what we can touch, what we can prove. This is where science comes in. Yeah, if we can prove it in a laboratory, that's perfect. If we cannot, then we're going to doubt its existence because there is no instrument which can measure it. And so, from the perspective of yoga, the moment that the seer and the seen unite, because of this ignorance, all the problems start because that's the formation of the ego. But at the same time, yoga also says that's also necessary to happen because the self by itself, by by itself, I don't know how to say it without using the word self. The self alone, he is consciousness, but
Mm.
consciousness needs an object to manifest in a way. He's conscious of something. So if you are just in that primitive state of consciousness and not aware of anything, how do you know you are conscious? So you need to become conscious of something. So the moment that this material world appears before us, and the moment we are born and we are little babies and we still don't have an ego, that consciousness feels united to everything, but then starts to see that they are different boundaries. This is the boundary of my skin. So, okay, and I can feel when I touch something. Okay, so this is me. And the thing I'm touching is not me. And then they create the separation. And that separation is the beginning of the formation of ego. Well, yoga says this union between the seer and the seen is caused by ignorance, but it's also necessary. And then eventually, as you become an adult, then you can transcend it, and then you can separate from the seen, and the seer can look at itself. So once you have experienced enough times looking at something, so being conscious of something, then you can become conscious that you are consciousness. And that's when the consciousness turns around and you realize your real self. So if we try to bring this idea to children too early, they are not ready to deal with it. Or if they did, they would not create an ego, and that would, I could imagine, they would create all sorts of problems. So the ego is necessary, and this ego is going to manifest no matter what.
Mm.
I would say it's almost impossible to raise a kid with no ego. It would have to be kind of like an animal, like a kid who is born and is just ends up being in nature and just in contact with other animals, and then it's just purely instincts, pure instincts. It could be. There's a number of cases of children who are raised by animals, so you can see how they don't know how to function in the world when they are brought into the society. So that's possible. But if we are talking about being humans, not being animals, the baby is gonna acquire that ego in some way. So even if the parent says, it's okay, you are doing fine, if it is, it may be our karma or whatever it is, we're gonna say, well, I know it's not fine. And then also if my mother says it's fine and I know this is not fine, that means I cannot rely on my mother.
Mm.
I'm trying to um, try to imagine what it could be to be a baby or a little child, and your parents telling you all the time this idea that everything is fine, everything is perfect, don't worry, you are perfect as you are, which is a wonderful thing to say. But for the child, it's like, okay, so it doesn't matter if I touch the hot oven. It
Mm.
doesn't matter if this drawing is awful. Can you appreciate that one drawing is better than the other? Because the child knows. And then
Mm.
you're saying, oh, they are all beautiful, baby. And you're like, no, they are not.
Mm.
So in a way, that that form of parenting which tries to be so positive. That's why I'm not sure. Maybe it's toxic positivity. It's and they are trying to not create that ego that you described, the one that feels traumatic because my parents didn't like my drawings and then they stopped drawing altogether. So trying to avoid that makes it so that the child has less capacity to trust their parents, which means he feels more unsafe.
Mm.
And because the children depend 100% on their parents when they're very small. If their parents don't provide that safety, where are they going to find it? And now, even worse, if they if they receive this message from their parents, but then as they come out into the world, into a school, and especially if it's a public school, right? Unless they are going to some very specific Waldorf school or something that they can, they give them some capacity to self-assess as well, but in a very healthy way. If they are going to a regular public school, they are going to very soon figure out that not everything is fine. Not
Mm.
everything I do is wonderful. And so, but one out of two, or they go through life thinking, I am wonderful, I can do whatever I want, and that's the narcissist I was mentioning before. So everybody has to cater to me. Or my parents tell me this, but when I go with this attitude in the school, I get into trouble.
Mm.
And then that means I cannot trust my parents, so I don't feel safe. But then I don't know how to function in the world because I was never taught to adapt and mold myself to whatever rules are around me, and so I don't know how to function in the school. And that we come back to the safety aspect, and then feeling unsafe. That could be traumatic in its own way, but maybe in a very different way than what we were talking before, right?
Yeah.
Does it make sense? Everything I'm really trying to elaborate it right now. I haven't thought about this too much, but I can imagine these children that I have this feeling. I see it in parents in the school that where we go. I have this feeling that these parents, they are so open, so wonderful. The children are a little bit wild. They
Mm.
don't listen to orders too much because they know that everything they do is perfect. And their parents, they will say, "You are a wonderful kid," and they will hug them and they will love them and they will not criticize them and they will forgive everything they do. And so there is a little bit of wildness, a little bit egocentric, a little bit, yeah. Or I cannot trust in my parents what they say because they are not. They are telling me these two drawings are wonderful. They are not. One is good, the other one is not. I can see that, so I cannot trust them. So who can I trust?
Mm.
And they are not strong enough to trust themselves. So who can I trust? So that kind of, I don't know. Is this from the psychological perspective? How do you see that?
So I think it's the human experience. Human beings have an ego, and the ego has a role. From a psychology perspective, we have a super ego, an ego, and an id. Id is your desire, ego is your mediator, and your super ego is what society and expects and fitting into a certain amount of moral code.
What's
Uh,
the mediator? What's the role of the mediator?
the
Can you elaborate a little bit?
ego. So it's not that if I want this, I must have it, is your id. The ego needs to negotiate between is this appropriate and my desire, and that's the role of the ego. And then the ego's development is the I, right? But do I have a healthy sense of I, or do I have an unhealthy sense of the I? And the I is necessary. Like you said, the consciousness needs something to act and create its creation in the world, right? So
Mhm.
my essence can only be acted out through the ego, right? But then it's whether the ego was developed healthy or whether the ego has an unhealthy development. And a healthy ego is essentially one that understands my intrinsic value, and that people, we appreciate and recognize people for their intrinsic value and worth, right? And that is something, and that's where I say parenting is about, not about maybe toxic positivity, as you said, but having the balance between um, suggesting not that you're perfect, but your essence, and validating what you feel, and listening to your opinion and making you feel value and worthy, that, for example, I come with a drawing, I spend time with you to understand your drawing rather than just telling you, why did you draw? So there are different responses, and I think there's a responsive parenting to that, where the child feels that something that I've done is valuable, or it's going to be seen, or it's going to be acknowledged. If I'm hurt, my emotions will be mirrored back to me, and I will be told that it's okay to feel hurt, and your hurt is accepted or your anger is accepted. And that's where you learn with the emotions what it is to have healthy emotions. There's space for my emotions, and those are things that are telling me that I'm inherently valuable and worthy. Not like, why are you crying? Go to your room and learn how to stop crying by yourself. There's no
Right.
space for your emotions here. And that's where I learned
No,
resilience.
nor the other side either, because if I, if, my whatever I do, my mother is gonna love me and she's gonna hug me and she's gonna say, "You are wonderful. You did great," which means that she doesn't really care what I do.
Which is different. I'm just perceiving it, I'm just suggesting it as not everything is a validation of how wonderful you are, but the validation that you are angry and it's okay to have anger, and
Right,
help you soothe that anger, understand that anger, be with that anger. But I
right,
don't just tell you, oh, you know go beat who you want, you're a wonderful kid. That's not what I mean. But I'm saying that the other part is to hold the child in safety, to say it's okay to be angry. When you're angry because somebody did something, let's understand that, let's soothe, so that I learn self-regulation, so that I learn I'm valuable, so that I learn, okay, fine, if I'm angry that someone, okay, that how does that person feel as well. And then you have that understanding of, and that's parenting versus the toxic positive parent that says that, oh, you're free to do what you want, go hit anybody and you're okay. And that would then give you the sense of the unhealthy ego that would seek praise, acknowledgement, validation, because it doesn't have that sense of intrinsic value, and therefore cannot see the value of others either. And so then, you know I am always right, or I'm quick to judge, or some of those, talking over people, not considering the other, right? In that space is an unhealthy ego. And that development is again based on environment, circumstances, and all of that. But the ego exists no matter what. So if you think that person's not going to have an ego, um it's only whether the development is a healthy one or an unhealthy one. And that depends on the environment and how, what sort of response the individual child receives, to give them a sense of uh, value, like value and worth intrinsically as a human being, as life on earth, right? Because if because that's essentially the work of psychology. It is to heal the develop, if the ego has not been developed healthy, then that's where the conflict begins.
mm,
I have difficulty in relationships, and then why can't I be in a healthy relationship? People call me selfish all the time or something, and those are the things that people come in with. And then you see the incongruence with themselves. They want, and that's where the issue begins. And then you work with that. And that brings me back to congruence and alignment of the wholeness, that the ego is not the only thing, the I is not the only thing. You also have this body, and you also have this essence, and you have people around you as well, and there's a collective,
right,
right?
right. Let's go back to that. Let's go back to that wholeness, because we
Yeah,
went through the ego, but now we need to come back to this. Yeah,
to the wholeness, yeah. And that
yeah.
that sense of, there's not just this I that I'm holding on to, and then therefore this I needs to win at any cost. And that's an unhealthy developed thing. But to connect the ego back to the essence and have that conversation, to say, okay, fine, and because I don't have that inherent sense of self, I need to do it at the cost of somebody else, possibly to feel more valuable and worthy, right? Whereas your essence says you're already whole, you're already value and worthy. And suddenly this ego is like, oh, okay, Nobody ever told me that. Or it told me that, all I need to care about is me, right? And then your soul, like we talked about last time, talks about your connection to your purpose and intuition, which is something greater than yourself. And that's when you come into alignment with mind, body, and soul, and the soul invites you to look at something greater than the self, than the I. Yeah.
All right. Sign me up. Who doesn't want that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think it's interesting that the sense of wholeness is, to me, was such a new concept. That, oh my God, nobody told me I was whole. I was whole because I was one of the people who went through trauma and believed I was broken and fragmented and nobody could fix me or help me.
Right.
I lived with that for the longest time, and there was a lot of, pain and shame around that,
Right.
until I got in touch with this part of me that said, you're whole, you're already that. So you don't need, you can let this belief of yours go because you're whole. That part of you can is not touched. It's your essence, you know. Which was deeply healing and was almost like anchoring me in something that gave me hope to
And
start.
and you did what we were talking the other day. You went through the training.
Yeah.
You saw your life as a training and you learn a lot of stuff. And maybe you had to, study psychology to help yourself. I find that that's very interesting. When I was in the university, I remember noticing this, that who studies computers? Well, those who are most interested about computers, they want to know how to fix them and how to assemble them and how to make them work and make them do funny things and curious things. And I found, because all the free credits, I was taking them from the psychology department. I love psychology, so I would go to the psychology. And it's quite a radical difference, because in computers, because I studied computer science, it was all guys. And so in 100 guys, there would be like two, three, four girls. So it was like a lot of testosterone and a lot of men, a lot of nerds. And then when I would go to the faculty of psychology, it would be complete opposite, like 100 girls, right? And maybe one or two guys. And I was there and I was like, okay, I'm not coming here just for the girls, but man, if I knew before, that would be a good idea, because a lot of the computer scientists are very socially maladjusted and they don't know how to approach girls. So, taking credits from psychology, that would be a great idea. But anyway, I didn't go for that reason. But what I noticed is that a lot of these girls were there because they didn't know how to deal with their mind. They
Mm-hmm.
were there because they, just like I was interested about computers, they wanted to figure out how their mind worked. And a lot of them had a lot of issues. So I was like, man, these guys had issues, these girls have issues, and which is different from the ones I would meet in the law department or the image and sound or whatever, because I would have friends from other departments and I would notice. But the ones in psychology, man, they had issues. And maybe that's why, because if you have had some issues and you want to deal with them, you want to learn how to deal with them, then it's a natural calling to go and study psychology. And I think it's great, because that means understanding, I'm going through a training, but I'm not just going to go to a therapist. I'm going to study psychology. I'm going to study what it means to be a therapist, so that I can put all that I went through into service.
Mm.
So yeah, that was quite funny, my experience in the psychology department. But anyway, okay, so let me bring a little bit of the yogic perspective on being whole. And I mentioned already that yoga means union, and all the problems start with the union between the seer and the seen. And the seen is the material world and everything that we have, even the body and emotions and the mind. This is something that has manifested, that is beyond the spirit. So that's also part of the seen. So from the yogic perspective, the path of coming back to the self, and this alignment and union between body, mind, and spirit, it can take many phases. And I believe that by finding union between different aspects of ourselves help a lot. So, for example, there is the left brain and right brain. Yeah, that you kind of mentioned. That's something that is very commonly studied in psychology. And in yoga, we recognize that. We also understand how that can influence. And so even there is even postures, physical postures that you can do because the brains are connected to the hemispheres to the body. So by working on the body in symmetrical and asymmetrical postures and flowing from one side to the other can help reconnect both brains,
Mm.
which is something very healthy to have a good interconnection between the two sides, because we don't want to just emphasize one. We have an overemphasis of the left brain already, especially in the Western world. I don't know about in India, but here in the West, if you go to school, they, I mean, I remember when my daughters were going to
Mm-hmm.
preschool, everything was hard. Everything was drawing and painting and sculpting and cutting things down. And it was amazing. And then when they went into primary school, suddenly they have to follow the curriculum from the state. And it's all these numbers of language, all these numbers, all these hours of mathematics, all these hours of learning countries, names of countries and seas and things like that. And a lot of it is left brain oriented. So suddenly there's there is the art class during the week when they go and have a little bit of art. And I'm pretty fortunate because the school of my daughters, they do theater and they do yoga and they do a number of things which are very artistic as well. But there is already an overemphasis on the left hemisphere, as particularly here in the West. So the yoga will approach it also in this side and say, well, okay, balance. We're talking about balance and whole. Being whole means both sides. So let's start by connecting both. So doing these asanas, these postures, and also breathing, because the air is going to flow through one of the nostrils according to which hemisphere is more active. So by regulating breath, we can regulate the activity in the hemispheres. And this is proven with positron emission tomography. So the science agrees with the yogis from thousands of years ago, doing a funny breath, closing the nostrils and breathing through one nostril and the other, a very, very strange kind of breath, but it's very universal to many yogas, which is not, every yoga has their own kind of take, but this breath is almost in many, many yogas, and science agrees, it works. So that would be an approach. So I already mentioned my approach would be balancing and including both hemispheres, the logical and the rational with the artistic and spontaneous.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing. Another thing would be we have an affective, a cognitive, and a psychomotor side. Yeah, I think this is from psychology.
Yep.
And we also understand from yoga, there is the cognitive is more about the thinking, and the affective is more about the feeling, and
Yep.
psychomotor is about the doing. And the doing, we work through the postures. So that's the physical work that we do in the body. That's going to help in the psychomotor. And then there is also a side of yoga, which is destined towards the mind, towards what we think, and another one towards how we feel. And we work on the mind, particularly through, but in a number of ways. One, through providing right understanding. So observing the world and understanding correctly what is happening. And that could be quite wide. I mean, the concept of what we call Gyan Yoga, the yoga of wisdom, that's very wide and includes many things. But it also includes about how to operate your own brain, like the manual for our own brain, right? There is no manual when we come into this world, but yoga gives us a lot of tools to learn how to concentrate, how to focus the mind, how to not be a slave of it, because that's a very, very common problem for many people who have never practiced yoga. They will say, maybe I have insomnia. I lay in my bed at night and I just cannot stop my mind. It's
Mm.
just thinking, 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 and I just cannot sleep. And I don't know how to do it. Or throughout the day, my mind is telling me all these negative things and I don't know how to stop. Well, yoga addresses that through a number of things, including meditation. That's the cognitive side, but also the affective side. And yoga works directly on our feelings. And there is a whole side of bhakti yoga, what we call, which is transforming emotion into devotion. So yes, emotions are fine. They are part of our experience, and we can utilize that energy to fuel our practice and to fuel our devotion. So from emotion to devotion, and include that part. So we take the mind and we include it. We take the emotions and we include them. The physical body, and we also include that, and we try to calibrate and align so that they are all working in par. They are all connected. And the last the other last important element is the spirit, then, because then, okay, through your devotion and the right understanding of the mind, and with a healthy body, then we are in a perfect situation to incarnate our spirit and feel this wonderful spiritual opportunity that we have in this world, and to connect to our essence, to our true essence. And there is a number of things that help us to do that from yoga. um, and it combines devotion and right understanding. It's a combination of all these things that are going to help us to connect to the spirit. Now, one thing that connects all of these, and one of the things that is more useful in finding the alignment of all these parts, is the breath, because the breath is in the body and affects the body, and anything that happens in the body affects the breath. The breath is connected to the mind. However we think is affecting our breath, and however we breathe is affecting our thoughts. Is connected to our emotions, because every emotion has a breathing signature, and changing the signature of our breath, or the pattern of our breath, changes the emotion that we are experiencing. Something we say in yoga often is like, if you cannot be angry and breathe 4 times per minute. So if you have a situation of anger, you can just control your breath and reduce it down to 4 times per minute, and the anger subsides in less than 10 minutes. So there's a direct connection between emotions and breath. And breath is the spirit, is our breath, is our consciousness, and is incarnating, inspirar, yeah, inspire, to bring the spirit in. So a lot of the techniques from yoga include breath. Even meditations will include breath. Practice with the physical body will include breath. And mantra, which is part of our devotion side, includes breath. So the breath is a fundamental aspect that is going to connect the body, the emotions, the mind, and the spirit. But we will start from small parts, maybe like the left and right hemisphere. Or also another one that I haven't mentioned, my masculine and my feminine side. There is some masculine and feminine qualities within everyone, and also within us. I am a man, but I do have some feminine qualities. Can I learn how to put both into balance? It's also connected to the hemispheres, but it's beyond the hemispheres. So it's a holistic approach on all the sides, but also local approach. So we go specifically, okay, today we're going to work on the hemispheres. Today we're going to be working on the cognitive and affective, or the feminine and the masculine, the yin and the yang. And by slowly working on every one of these sides, overall, when you look at the year, after 1 year, you've been calibrating a little bit each one of these, because you calibrate one side and then the other ones get a little bit out of tune. Then you go to this one and you calibrate a little bit this one, and the other ones get a little bit out of tune. So you have to be constantly tuning all of them to create this perfect symphony, inner symphony,
Yeah, in a harmony.
inner harmony. Yes.
That they're all speaking to each other, that both sides of the brain, as we say in psychology, are speaking to each other, because we're seeing that in this world today, as you've beautifully talked about, the cognitive, the affect, and the psychomotor, is you're highly cognitive, right? We've become highly cognitive, and the emotional aspects, and so many like so much of conditioning around men should not be emotional, women, the messaging that we receive, that to be a whole human being, wholeness comes from activating both sides of the brain working in balance.
Can I just mention one thing here? I've noticed that the more intelligent is the person, the more challenge they have with their emotions often. Because the more they develop the brain and they go into and I'm not sure it's intelligent or intellectual, but the more they go into the mind, the more they're gonna leave the emotions to the side and they're gonna value them less as well.
Yeah. And if we aren't taught earlier on that emotions are okay and they're safe and they can be regulated, then we kind of in psychology we begin to shut them down.
Yeah.
We begin to start what we call emotional numbing, and then we're living anyway naturally more in the mind, and then we live in a very distracted world. So we're not connected to the emotion. We're disconnected from that aspect of ourselves. And we're only living in the mind. We're only trying to live logical, practical, pragmatic, which is okay to some extent, but then you're missing the joy and the feeling and the emotion of being fully alive and present with what is in the
It's a
moment.
wasted opportunity.
Yeah. And then people say, but I don't feel anything. I don't feel anything. And then you realize that people are now afraid to even feel. Um, and that's the world we're living in. So we're distracting from those emotions instead of coming back and saying that we need to go towards not enhancing, like you said, it's the nature of our schools from going from one right brain to left brain completely, and then there is no room for that interwovenness of allowing both brains to speak, when which is when all of me comes alive, all aspects of me are connected, and there is an awareness of, and feeling is your sensations in your body, you're present in the moment, all aspects of you, your five senses, your, the experience of what you are in this moment is what makes it authentic and genuine, right? And that's when I'm wholly present. Otherwise, I'm only half present, right? If only my mind is here but my emotions are offline, I'm not wholly present here.
Mm.
And we pride ourselves on being strong. I don't get hurt, I don't get affected. And that is taking away from the essence of being of the wholeness, right?
Right.
That that we need to nurture every aspect of it to make it whole. We need to nurture, and that's why I think today mindfulness is brought into therapy to bring our awareness to all of these aspects, moment to moment, of our thoughts, of our body emotions, our sensations, our environment, our lens, our perspective, and to hold in our awareness all of these aspects that make us whole, all these parts of ourselves that are constantly talking to each other. But if we switch off from the body, the disconnection from the body or the disconnection from our emotions or essence, is us living only with the head. And
Right.
then we're not fully present and we're not whole and we're not connecting with each other. And that experience of that I am whole ceases to be, and then we're in pain and suffering because we're cut off and that disconnection has occurred. um, and it's about like guiding ourselves back to holding all those elements of what makes us whole, fully present in that moment to engage with another human. It's on the phone, I'm looking at the TV trying to talk to you, all of those things that have come in the way of our wholeness, um, in us being fully present, mind, body, and spirit, in any conversation, in any work that we do, in any moment. And then we wonder why we're not happy and why we feel something is missing.
Right. What else is there to say? How apart from actually going to a therapist, to a psychologist, what tips would you give as a psychologist to somebody who wants to live more that whole life, that holistic life?
I would give tips for journaling. I would give, I would say, being more mindful, spending a lot of time on becoming aware of the self. So using meditation as a tool, and a lot of people say, but my mind is too active to meditate, and it doesn't have to be going into deep yogic meditation to begin with. Even sitting with an awareness of a tree, for a few moments and noticing the tree. And every time the mind comes back online, you ask it to take a step back so you can be fully present, and then bring your presence to to the body sensations and to recognize it's who we are in this moment is necessary. Yoga really helped me to balance both sides of the brain, just the nature of which every yogic posture has something to do with the left side, and then to mirror that with the right side, and then to do it with the right side and mirror that to the left side, which allows both parts of the brain to be equally um, sort of exercised, so to say, or be brought online if it's been not used or not connected to as often. So um, art is a big way to connect both sides of the brain. um, what else do we what would else would I suggest? Um, using anything that that you use your hands with, anything, pottery, and things that really bring out an expression of who you are, or just connecting to the self, writing, you know and yeah, I think these are some of the tips that I would say would help consider, integrating both sides of the brain and coming into wholeness, which can be fun, you know um for someone to kind of do.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, especially this one you were mentioning, the utilizing the hands. That's very useful to get out of the head.
Mm.
Yeah, when you are too much in the head, utilizing the hands is a way to get the energy out and into an action that you are creating something. Be creative with that.
Yeah, because it's only then can we become creative with problem solving as well,
Hmm.
right? Otherwise we'll have the same way of doing the same thing, and that doesn't allow the brain to open up and use the potential of the brain. And then that's the only way I know to do it, and that takes away from possibilities. And wholeness, when you come up whole, it opens up and expands possibilities for the human being who never knew it was possible to show up in a different way.
Wow. Well, Nyana, Satseva, this has been quite a journey. I think we reached this a very clear conclusion to this first series. Yeah, approaching it from, we went through the mind and the word and the essence and every one of those little elements. And for those of you who are listening, for those of you who reached this point and you've been listening to all, first of all, bravo, and congratulations for keeping the commitment. But probably you could also understand now the progression with which we went, and also how all the little pieces are like making a beautiful puzzle. And the little piece of the mind that we talked in the first day, and the words, and the essence, and every one of these was a piece. And especially on the last podcast, maybe from the moment we started to talk about power up until today, they have been connecting this and this and this and that, and it's becoming like a whole. It's
Mhm.
becoming like a whole that is more than the parts. And I think we reach a great spot. This is not the end of the podcast. We will do a season 2, but it's the end of the season 1, which is relationships, right, Satseva?
Yes, absolutely, Adash. So thank you so much, everyone, for being with us on this journey. Stay tuned. We will be back with season 2. And up until then, thank you so much, and keep listening and stay tuned.
Thank you, everyone. And we will begin in next year in